Welcome back, everybody. So while the rims are out getting TIG welded, I decided to move on to doing some of the engine work, because at some point it's going to have to be done, and I got parts sitting around and I'm basically waiting on wheels. So this is what I'm going to do. So I've got all the pistons laid out, and I've already pre-weighed these things, pistons versus the pin. So what I did was weighed the pin separately, weighed the piston separately. Got those individual weights, and then I said, well, what I'm going to do is take the lightest piston and put it with the heaviest pin, and get them as close as possible. And then what I'm going to do is balance piston and pin together. And it was already set up so the lightest piston is with the heaviest pin already, so there's nothing to do there. So this scale is a bit fidgety, so when I weighed these pistons, I was in the house, and they came back all a certain weight, probably within like 2 grams of each other, like heaviest to lightest. And it's still that same measurement, except now I come out here and all the pistons are a little bit lighter in the weight than they were in the house, and basically all they've done is sat in the cold. So I don't know if this scale is just fidgety. It seems to be accurate. I can weigh a piston, and usually I weigh each one 3 times and make sure I get an average weight, and it seems accurate as far as that. But yeah, like if I measure them today, I could write all those measurements down, which I've done, and then come back 2 days later and measure them, and they'll all be the same amount of weight off from each other, but they'll be a completely different weight by, as much as 4 or 5 tenths of a gram. So it's kind of weird how this thing is. So I'm going to try to do this in one sitting, so that way I don't have any issues later trying to get accuracy on the weights. So let's go. Let's start with number 1, 8961, and I'm doing every one of them 3 times. 8961, 8961. So I'm going to 8961. So I'm going to record all of these weights, and then what I've got to do is cut material off of 8950, cut material off the heavier ones to match up with the lightest one. 8950, 8950. And we'll do all 8 of these this way. So I've measured these out, weighed them all, and it's still, the one that was the lightest the last time I weighed them, still the lightest piston. So you've got 8944, 8944, lightest piston. So then what I've got to do is, I've got to take material off the rest of these to get it down to that 8944. And some of these, like I got 8962, so there's quite a difference between them. I'm going to get these to where they're all 8944. So now the question is, how much do you need to take off to affect my weight? Number 8 I've already worked on. So you've got these balancing pads on the bottom of the piston. Okay, so what I did was I weighed this one. This was the heaviest piston, and it was 896.2. So it was quite a bit off from the lightest one. So this is 9.4, this is 9.6. So I got to lose 2 grams. Quite a bit on a piston. But anyway, so I just ground down the balancing pads, and then also I had a grinding stone that was actually a circular grinding stone, and I did a quick bevel around the inside of the pin on either side to kind of help, because I didn't want to take too much material out of the balancing pad. So I got this down to where I think, of course, before when I measured it, 5 and 8 were the same. So let's see where they sit now. 8946, 8946, 8945. And let me check this one again. Back to 8944, 8946, 8945. So I think 8945. Okay, we're going to go with 8945. So we are very close to within 1/10 of a gram. There it is, 8945. 8945. I'm going to call that one done. So I've got to do that basically to all 8 of them to match them down to number 5 here. So number 5, we're going to go with 8945, and number 8 is also 8945. All right, so I'm going to spare you all the grinding. It's just tedious work, but it has to be done because I want this to be as close to balance as I can get, and I'm saving money by doing it myself. So I'm going to get all of these to 8945. So anyway, now all it is me sitting here, and literally what I'm doing is I'm making a couple of passes, because I just got a flat wheel aluminum, well, here it is. It's a red roll-lock disc. It's for aluminum, so it's not taking off, it's not too aggressive, it's not taking off too much material. So make a couple passes. I think I did like 5 passes, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, both sides, and then I come back and weigh it. Okay, that was 3/10 of a gram. Go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let me see. This one, because of the huge amount of weight difference, I actually had to take quite a bit out. But if you look at this, is why it's the balancing pad. Let me get this right. So I don't know if you can see this, but there's actually a ridge. This portion right here, this machined part, is actually stands up taller than the whole skirt here. So it's meant to be ground down to get your balance in step. So like I said, it was 2 grams. It was quite a bit. So I took some material off of this, and then I also did a little bevel on either end of the pin just to take off a little bit more weight, just so I wasn't taking it all from the bottom of the piston. Just beveled the very end of the pin. That's not going to do any damage at all. It's not going to cause any strength issues. Anyway, so that's where we're at. I got to do 6 more of these because 2 of them are balanced, and then this will all be done, and then I'll move on to rods. So I guess I'll be back, and then I'll kind of explain the jig that I got to set up to do the rods. So now that the pistons have been balanced, I got to do the same thing with the rods. So first, what I'm going to do is create my jig that's going to hold the rod so I can measure the big ends and the small ends. So I can get the weight, because the machine shop needs that in order to accurately set up the bob weights that attach to the crank when they balance the crank. So these are important measurements that I'm putting together so I can give to them So I decided to spend as little money as possible. So this base is actually just a piece of particle board left from some old bookshelf that we had that's I think since been destroyed except for a couple of these shelves. So I use that for the base. Piece of, this is actually hardwood from scrap piece left over from the foyer when we had the house built. The builder just threw a bunch of this in the basement, all the scraps that were left, in case we ever needed it, and they've been sitting down there for 10 years, and I was like, well, I'm going to repurpose one of them. So I went ahead and pre-drilled my holes, and I got one screw in the back, and I'll show you what that's for later. So anyway, so just a little bit of measuring. Went out to a hardware store, I had to buy some chain. So I got a length of chain, a PVC cap that actually is just a little bit under the size for the big end, which works perfect because you want to be able to have it sit on it correctly. The socket is just a little bit smaller than the small end, so that works good for that. The chain's going to suspend that. Bought a couple of L brackets that came with their own screws, so everything was together. And one almost looks like it's like a shelf bracket, but I bought that in order to hold the cap on. So I already pre-assembled that. So let's just go through, and I'm going to put the L brackets on this and then mount it to my base here. Okay, so that's screwed together. We're going to put our scale down here, get this on top, and then let's put the rod in here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the rod for a second. Okay, so there's two measurements. You're measuring big and small end, and basically the reason for that is you've got two different types of weight that's going on. So you've got rotational weight and you've got reciprocal weight. All right, so if you think about it, this end is bolted to the crankshaft. So it is going in this kind of motion. So that's your rotational weight. This is very important. You got to make sure that this is as close as you can get it to within a gram. I think the standard is like 1 gram average from one to the other. So anyway, so this end's got to be very a critical measurement because this is where the bob weight comes into effect for putting on the crank to actually get your balance for the crankshaft. And then you've got the reciprocal weight, which is basically, it's the entire rod. It's going up and down inside the cylinder, piston attached to the top. Now I've seen two general ways that you measure these things. One, you set up a jig and you measure the big ends, measure all the big ends, and there's balancing pads on the bottom of the rod cap, and there's also balancing pads on the top of the rod. And those are your two spots where you take weight from. That's it. So you balance this out, set it up in your jig, and then you weigh all the big ends. Make sure that all those are the same. Now, when it comes to the small end, I've seen it done two different ways. One, you actually swap it around, and you put I'd put the socket over here and put this over on the other side and hang it, and then you'd weigh the small end of the rod. And in theory, the small end of the rod and the big end of the rod, those two combined weights, if you weighed the rod by itself, that should be the overall weight of the rod itself. So I've seen some places where, okay, look, we're going to do a measurement on the big end, and then they just measure the entire weight of the rod. Once they have their weights measured out for the big end, measure the entire rod, and then whatever the entire weight of the rod is, you take weight off of the little end until all the rods weigh the same. So in theory, I think both ways actually work. I'm going to probably measure the big and little end just because when I talked to the guy at the machine shop, he specifically wanted to know the rotational reciprocating weight. So I'm going to do it that way just because that's what he's asking for, and then more than likely those two measurements are going to be your total weight of the rod, but I'm going to do it like that. So I've got the jig set up, and basically what you do is, because you don't want, if I just bolted the other end over here and then fit it on, there's a possibility that because of the angle or something that this end might actually give you a false reading, because it might pull it a little one way or another. So what I've seen a lot of guys do on these homemade versions, put the socket in, and then we'll drop the chain through the socket. There we go. All right, so the chain goes through the socket, and then now you would take an entire assembly, you'd run the chain up through here, you'd run both ends, and what I've seen them do is just actually cut the chain to the length that they need, and then they use the little clasp that's on it to clasp it. But my thing is, I want to be able to do the small and the big ends, and I don't want to have to worry about the weight of the length of the chain being an issue. So I put a screw, if you remember, I put a screw on the back of the board. So I'm just going to wrap the chain around that. Oh, I might have to use a clamp or something. All right, I'll figure that out. But now this end is kind of suspended. So now there's no force being applied, like trying to hold it in place this way. So now this can actually sit free, and you want it pretty much level. So there's level. So the scale that I have, it's easy. You just turn it on, and it's going to zero out with my fixture on there, and then just put the rod on, release it, get my weight measurement, put it back to 0, release, and I pretty much with this I've been checking everything 3 times. So if I can get an average of the same weight 2 of the 3 times, that's the weight I'm going to go with. And then we'll measure all the rods that way. Let's pull this back down so we can sit. So these rods I got from a company called PAW. It's Performance Automotive Warehouse. I don't even think they're in business anymore, but if any of you older guys remember, you could get, I think you actually had to pay to buy their catalog, but their catalog was insane. It was like that thick. It was like the Bible of automotive parts, and they just went deep into every possible part you could think of for every range of vehicle. I mean, it had everything in it. If you ever needed to find a part that you couldn't find in like a JAGS catalog or online or something like that, that book usually had it. It was crazy. That's where I got my Offenhauser intake from as well. So they had an extensive machine shop, because you could buy an entire built engine. They had aluminum block 350s. You could buy, you know, weird stuff. You could buy Buicks and Oldsmobiles, different engines. So they had a huge machine shop. I think that's how they originally started, and then they branched out into selling parts online. So I got these rods from them, and it comes here. They came all packed. They came individually wrapped, which is nice. And it actually comes here. It came with this one sheet, and it gives you all the specs for it. So it was an average total weight of 848 grams. Average rotational weight was 601 grams, and average reciprocating weight was 247 grams, which 601 and 247 gives you your 848. So I'm going to measure these against the actual specs that are on here. If all the rods, because it looks like they took the time to make sure everything was balanced out. So I may have nothing to do here except just double checking the weight. Okay, so the jig is all set up, and I've been sitting here measuring this first rod, and I was getting a lot of weird, like varying readings, as much as like 10 grams, which is kind of weird. And then I realized that when I'm sitting it on this, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's there. It's moving around just enough to where it's throwing the weight off a little bit. So what I did was I got it on there, and what looked to me to be dead center, and then I marked it on the cap here to make sure that it lines up with the split point of the rod cap and the rod. And then I think it made it a little bit easier, and I started getting a repeatable figure within like 1 or 2 grams. So this first rod measured out to 601.5. That's right on the money, because it said the average weight was 601 grams per rod for the big ends. So I'm going to go through and measure all the rest of them. If they all come up to within that 601 range, which I mean, I don't have any feeling that they're not going to, because the shop I ordered them from was pretty reputable at the time, and they balanced them all out and have all the weights down. So basically, I'm just going to go and double check their work. But I don't think it's going to be any different than what they measured. So anyway, so if I get all 8 done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send them off to the machine shop, pistons, rods, block, crank, and then have all my machine work done. I was even thinking about assembling the pistons and rods myself to save a little bit of time. But the guy said, regardless of whether I do that or not, the charge to balance the crank, which involves weighing the rods and the pistons, is the same whether I do it or whether he does it. And I think, well, you know, if that's the case, I'm just going to let him do it, because he's actually got a machine that you put it in there, and it gives an even flame on both sides of the small end, so you can press the rods in. He's got the jigs and everything set up for that, and he's got a proper jig that measures out the rods, and he's going to use the scale that's in his shop. And he's probably not going to appreciate me showing up with everything assembled and saying, oh yeah, these were the weights. If I was running a machine shop, I'd want to weigh everything myself. So I knew that when I set the bob weights up to balance the crank, it's going to be right. So I'm not going to have some yahoo come back and say, oh, you didn't balance the crank right. Well, that's because you told me what the balancing point was for each one of those, and you know, I would have rather done it myself. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I got the pistons balanced to within 1/10 of a gram, and then I'll put that measurement in there when I send them off, and he can check all that with his scale, so he can set up his bob weights to balance the crank correctly. So I think I'm happy. So I'm going to go ahead and just double check the rest of these, but I don't have much doubt now that these are all going to come out the same. But I did set up my own jig, and I did check it, and it did check out versus what the measurement was that it came with. So I'm kind of happy that I was able to duplicate that, and it is halfway accurate. Yeah, so this is the last step, and then it's off to machine work. Now, as far as machine work, I'm going to have the block cleaned and checked to make sure that it's a good, viable block. I don't have any doubts of that, but I just want to make sure. It's got to be punch 60 over. I'm going to 0 deck it, and then have the crank balanced and have the rods and pistons assembled, and then I'm going to bring everything home, and I'm going to actually assemble the engine myself. That'll save me some money there too. I'm probably looking at around $1,700 for all the machine work that needs to be done. So that's where I'm at, and I think that's where we'll end. Oh, wait, no. One last thing. Let me show you this. This just came in the mail. Let's see if I can get this unwrapped for you. So I was talking with my guy who's going to do the machine work, and I asked them if they had a torque plate or a honing plate, as it will be called, and they said no. They said that you're going to be hard-pressed to find anybody for an Oldsmobile engine that's going to have a torque plate, just because there's not a lot of work being done on those anymore, so shops just don't have them anymore. So I found a company online, J&S Machine, and they actually sell torque plates or honing plates, whatever you want to call it. And I just happened when I asked the machinist if they had a torque plate, and they said, no, we don't have one. And he said, and I checked with a buddy, and he doesn't have one either. I went to J&S, and it was actually on sale. So I got it for, I think, 80 bucks off what they usually sell it for. So that was kind of cool. And if you don't know what one of these are, basically when you're doing the bore and then the final hone on the block. You put this torque plate on. I think he used the gasket with it too, because it came with a used 455 head gasket. Looks like a Felpro. So this takes the place of the cylinder head. So basically, when the engine's done and you bolt the cylinder head on and torque it down, it puts a stress on the cylinders of the block, because you're pulling these two heavy lumps together, and sometimes it'll distort the piston bore just ever so slightly. So what you do is, I'm not sure if they do it when they bore, but definitely when they do the final hone, this is bolted on and torqued down, and then what it does is it puts the block under that stress that it would encounter when you torque the heads on. And then they do the final hone, which will put the cylinder bores exactly dead correct when the heads go on. So there's no distortion, because it's already been accounted for in torquing this down to the block, which is going to help out quite a bit. I'm going to send that off with the rest of the components, and that way, when the bores are done, I know they're going to be dead on. That's me. I'm just anal retentive like that. So anyway, so I'm going to finish measuring the rods, but I don't have any doubt that they're probably not going to come out exactly what the spec card said. And then send everything off, and then get my machine work done, and then next it'll be on the stand, and I'll be building the block, and I'm very excited about that. I haven't put together an engine in a while, and I'm looking forward to it. So that's the next step. So it may be a while before you see another video, because first I've got to save up the money to do the machine work. It's probably going to be about $1,700, like I said, I think. Then I got to get everything back, and I've got to like gather all the rest of the parts up that I don't have. I need to get bearings and rings and you know, the standard stuff that goes along with putting an engine together. So yeah, it may be a minute before there's another video, but then when I come back, it's going to be on the engine stand, and I'm going to be putting this bad boy together. And I'm excited, because once the engine is together, there's no reason I can't get my transmission, torque converter, get all that stuff going, and actually have a video of me starting this thing up, which is going to be exciting all in itself. I'm rambling, so I'm going to stop. Well, that's it for now, guys. Hope you enjoyed any of this, some of this. Anyway, that's all I got. I'll see you guys later.